Hi, I'm Sarah Thorpe.
And I'm Suki Rob Wilder.
This is Sonoma County Measure I. You'll see it on your ballot as Sonoma County Child Care and Children's Health Initiative and Sales Tax. It's an initiative statute. Suki, what question does Measure I ask voters?
Measure I asks, shall the county impose a 1/4% sales tax to help fund childcare, early childhood education, and other healthcare services for low and middle income children?
Can you give us some background for Measure I?
Yes. Since the pandemic, there's been a loss of both in-home childcare and childcare centers. There are now fewer spaces for children. Also, many childcare providers have left the field because of the low pay. And for the past 25 years, the state tobacco tax revenue has been dedicated to early childhood development. But this revenue is declining. As a result, local child local community-based services will be cut significantly in 2025 and beyond.
What's the current status of childcare in Sonoma County?
The state and county provide a range of services to families based on income and age of child through local organizations. But last fall, only 1 in 4 children were ready for kindergarten when they entered school, and there are continuing disparities along racial, ethnic, and economic lines. About 7,800 children are enrolled in daycare and preschool programs, but that's down from nearly 12,800 before the pandemic.
What does Measure I propose?
Measure I proposes adding a 1/4% sales tax that will remain in effect until it is ended by voter approval. After administrative expenses, 60% of the annual revenue, that's about $18.2 million, will go to increase access to childcare and early childhood education for low income families. And 40% of the revenue, about $12.2 million, will prioritize access to physical and mental health services for children affected by homelessness, neglect, or trauma. It will also improve wages and training for child care providers.
Who will oversee the funds?
The funds will be administered by the First Five Sonoma County Commission, collaborating with a community advisory council. Funds will be audited annually by an independent auditor.
What will be the fiscal impact?
Well, the countywide sales tax rate now is 8.5%. If this measure passes, the rate will increase to 8.75%. And the rate will be higher in cities and in areas that have their own sales taxes.
What are supporters saying?
Supporters say this funding is desperately needed. Sonoma County has lost more than 40% of childcare related funding due to wildfire, the pandemic, and the declining tobacco tax revenue. They also say these much needed funds will allow Sonoma County to support families, children, and childcare service providers.
And what do the opponents say?
No arguments are listed to date.
Can you tell us about campaign financing?
Yes, as of September 3rd, $460,000 has been contributed in support of Measure I, and there are no reported contributions in opposition.
So, in conclusion, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
A yes vote means that you approve increasing the county-wide sales tax by 1/4%, and a no vote means you oppose increasing the sales tax.
Thank you, Suki.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Therese Scherer, and this is Jim Masters, and this is Sonoma County Measure J. You'll see it on the ballot as Sonoma County Prohibition on Concentrated Animal Feeding Operations, CAFOs. It needs a simple majority to pass. Jim, what question does Measure J pose to the voters?
Measure J asks, should concentrated animal feeding operations as defined by federal regulations be phased out in the unincorporated areas of Sonoma County?
And what's the current situation around Measure J?
Concentrated animal feeding operation, or CAFO, is a term developed by the Environmental Protection Agency Clean Water Act to identify and prevent pollution risks to U.S. waterways.
How are CAFOs classified?
The EPA classifies CAFO operations as small, medium, and large based on the number of days animals are confined, herd or flock size, and method of waste discharge.
What are the numbers of animals in CAFOs?
A large CAFO for dairy cows is a herd of 700 plus. For poultry, a large CAFO can number 5,000 to 125,000, depending on type of poultry and manure handling system.
Are there requirements for CAFOs in the county now?
All dairies in the county with 200 cows or more must have a manure pool that captures waste runoff. The exact number of CAFOs in Sonoma County is in dispute.
Who reviews compliance and what have they determined?
The North Coast Regional Water Quality Board has determined that all Sonoma County CAFOs are currently in compliance with federal wastewater regulations for all types of animals.
Are there any current regulations about animal confinement?
Yes, voters approved a measure in 2018 that provides protection against continued confinement for veal calves, breeding pigs, and egg-laying hens. It is fully implemented.
What does Measure J propose?
Measure J would amend the county code to phase out existing CAFOs and prohibit future CAFOs in the unincorporated areas of Sonoma County. The agriculture commissioner would be required to assess each farm to determine if they qualify as a CAFO, work with the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals or another California-based animal welfare organization to establish best practices for phasing out CAFOs, create job retraining programs for lost jobs, present an annual report on compliance of all aspects of the proposal to the Board of Supervisors.
Would there be any penalties in the measure?
Yes, Measure J would impose financial penalties for noncompliance. It would be a misdemeanor to retaliate against anyone who makes a good faith complaint.
What is the fiscal impact?
The Agricultural Commissioner estimates Measure J would cost $1.6 million in additional costs annually to oversee the 3-year phase out period. Sonoma County Health and Human Services estimates it would incur $1.5 million in additional costs for employment-related services due to related lost jobs. Sales tax revenue could decrease from the potential loss of related businesses and services, and local food costs could increase as once local products would need to come from outside the area.
What are supporters saying?
Supporters say California animal cruelty laws are being violated with no accountability. They say CAFOs are major polluters. Waste from CAFOs is often stored in open pits, leading to water pollution and toxic waste. They are a serious risk to public health. And they say increasing dominance of CAFOs has undermined small farms in Sonoma County. Measure J would level the playing field, revitalize the local agricultural economy, and promote sustainable farming practices.
And opponents, what are they saying?
Opponents say both small and large Sonoma County agricultural operations use state-of-the-art practices to protect water quality, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and protect animals. They say without local producers, food costs will rise. There will be an increase in greenhouse gas emissions and a loss of green belts and open space. And they say Sonoma County's dairies account for almost 41% of the state's certified organic dairy products.
Can you tell us about campaign financing?
Yes, 210,000 has been contributed in support of Measure J, and 441,000 has been contributed in opposition so far. See the contributors on your screen.
In summary, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
A yes vote means the Sonoma County Code will be amended to authorize the Agricultural Commission to phase out CAFOs in unincorporated areas of Sonoma County. And a no vote means the existing Sonoma County Code will not be amended.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Therese.
Hi, I'm Bob Pandoli, and this is Karen Weeks, and this is Sonoma County Measure W. You'll see it on your ballot as Sonoma County Library. It requires a 2/3 vote in favor to pass. Let's start with the question Measure W poses to voters.
Okay, Bob. The question the voters are being asked in Measure W is, should Sonoma County extend the 1/8 cent transaction and use tax on tangible personal property to support the Sonoma County Library?
Can you give us some background, please?
Sure. In 2016, voters approved a 1/8 cent transaction and use tax That current tax will expire in 2027.
So what libraries are supported by this tax currently?
The tax supports public libraries in Cloverdale, Healdsburg, Petaluma, Roanoke Park, Cotati, Santa Rosa, Sebastopol, Sonoma, the town of Windsor, and library services in unincorporated areas of the county.
And how are tax funds spent?
The funds from the current tax make up 40% of the library's total budget. This tax supports library collections, public educational programs, homework help, teacher resources, computer labs, partnerships with local schools, and more throughout the county. It also funds improvements in library buildings, hours, and staff. The Sonoma County Library serves approximately 495,000 residents across Sonoma County annually. More than 85,000 children participate in the Sonoma County Library's reading and educational programs each year.
Is there any oversight of the funds?
Yes, the funds are subject to strict accountability provisions, including an annual financial audit and an independent citizens oversight committee.
So what exactly does Measure W propose?
Measure W would extend the 1/8 cent sales tax until the voters repeal it.
And how will the funds be handled?
Proceeds from the tax shall be deposited into the county treasury in a separate special fund, which can only be used to maintain and enhance library services, materials, and facilities in Sonoma County. The funds cannot be used for any other purposes.
Will the service area or the services provided change?
It will continue to serve libraries in all Sonoma County cities and unincorporated areas. It will support library collections, educational programs, and classes for Sonoma County school age and preschool children, and more. It will improve access to local libraries and maintain aging library facilities.
Will fund oversight change?
No, the funds will continue to be subject to the same strict accountability, annual financial audits, and independent citizens oversight committee.
So what are the physical impacts of Measure W?
It would impose a 1/8 cent sales tax, producing approximately $18 million annually to be used by the library system.
What are supporters saying?
Supporters say public libraries are one of the few places left in the community that benefits everyone, including children, families, small business owners, workers, seniors, and disabled people. Sonoma County needs libraries to continue to provide a safe place to learn, grow, and come together. Most of Sonoma County's libraries are more than 50 years old. This renewed funding will help improve facilities, making them safe, clean, and welcoming.
And the opponents, what are they saying?
Opponents say we don't need a new sales tax measure at all. Measure Y is still in effect for another 2 years. Measure W would extend indefinitely library management spending spree. They also say a better Measure W could be drafted that would take effect after Measure Y's sunset, that places a time limit on sales tax funding and lets the public know in layperson's language where the money is being spent. We have plenty of time.
What's the campaign financing for Measure W?
No money has been donated for or against Measure W as of September 3rd, 2024.
In conclusion, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
A yes vote extends the existing county sales tax of 1/8 cent supporting Sonoma County libraries until repealed by voters. And a no vote means that the 1/8 cent sales tax supporting Sonoma County libraries will end April 1st, 2027.
Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome, Bob.
Hi, I'm Becky Bingay,
And I'm Carol Joy Harris.
and this is California State Proposition 2. You will see it on your ballot as authorizes bonds for public school and community college facilities. It is a legislative statute. Carol Joy, what is the question raised by Prop 2?
The question is, should the state authorize $10 billion in general obligation bonds for repair, upgrade, and construction of facilities at K-12 public schools, including charter schools and community colleges?
Now, what is the current situation? How many schools and colleges are there in California?
Currently, there are about 10,000 K-12 public schools statewide, including about 1,300 charter schools and 115 local community colleges that offer associate degrees and other programs for adults.
Is there information on the current state of California public schools?
Yes, according to a 2020 publication from the Public Policy Institute of California, 38% of California students attend schools that don't meet minimum facility standards. And 15% of students attend schools with extreme deficiencies, such as gas leaks, power failures, and structural damage.
Who pays for facility costs related to these schools and colleges?
The state and the school districts usually share the cost for renovation and new construction almost equally. The state uses voter-approved bonds for its share of these costs. Both school districts and community college districts are expected to pay the remaining project costs using local funds.
And what does Proposition 2 propose?
Well, Prop 2 authorizes $10 billion in state general obligation bonds for repair, upgrade, and construction of education facilities.
And how would that be distributed?
$8.5 billion of that would be allocated for renovations, repairs, and construction of K-12 schools, and $1.5 billion would be allocated for community college improvements. Of that money, Prop 2 allows up to $115 million to be used for reducing lead levels in water at public school sites.
How would the funds be awarded?
K-12 funds would be awarded after a competitive application process on a first-come, first-served basis. Extra funding can be allocated to build a new classroom or to renovate an existing classroom to be used for transitional kindergarten. This extra funding would also cover projects supporting low-income students, English learners, or foster youth.
Does Prop 2 cover all these costs?
No, districts would need to raise their own local bonds and apply to the state facilities program for a matching grant to receive funding.
How are these funds awarded to community colleges?
Colleges would submit a plan listing their statewide project priorities. The governor and the legislature would then select specific projects to fund.
And is there oversight on community college funding?
Oh, yes. The districts would be required to complete certain tasks to help ensure that the bond funds are spent as intended.
What is the fiscal impact of Proposition 2?
There would be increased state costs of about $500 million annually for 35 years to repay the bond. Payments would be made from the state general fund. This would be less than 0.5% of the state's total general fund budget.
So what do supporters say about Prop 2?
Supporters say any school bond placed on the ballot is not going to cover the enormous needs of K-12 schools and community colleges, but this money would help address the most urgent needs. They say that the funds to make the basic structural repairs needed at every school are lacking. Students need safe spaces to learn in order to reach their full potential. Supporters also say that Prop 2 would increase access to quality, affordable higher education for all Californians, including returning veterans. It would allow more students to start their college education and transfer to a four-year university without crushing debt.
And what do opponents say?
Opponents say bonds are borrowed money that must be paid back, plus interest, even if that means cutting vital programs to do it. They say that children in school today would be drowning in new debt for decades if Prop 2 passes. Opponents also say that it's reckless to borrow billions more to pay for more school buildings when district enrollment is declining in both K-12 public schools and community colleges.
Now, Carol Joy, can you tell us about campaign financing?
Sure, Becky. Through August 21st, a total of $1.8 million has been contributed in support of Prop 2. You can see the top contributors there on your screen. And in opposition, no contributions have been filed to date.
In conclusion, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
Okay, a yes vote supports issuing the $10 billion in bonds for repair, upgrade, and construction of public education facilities. And a no vote opposes issuing this $10 billion in bonds.
Thanks, Carol Joy.
You're welcome, Becky.
Hi, I'm Suki Rob Wilder,
And I'm Carol Joy Harris.
and this is Proposition 3. You'll see it on your ballot as a constitutional right to marriage. It's a legislative constitutional amendment. Carol Joy, what question does Prop 3 pose?
Proposition 3 poses the question, shall California's Constitution be amended to recognize that marriage is a fundamental right regardless of sex or race, and remove language stating that marriage is only between a man and a woman?
And what's the background to Proposition 3?
Well, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in 2015 that all state laws that ban or do not recognize marriages on the basis of race or sex are unconstitutional. This ruling is based on the Due Process and Equal Protection Clauses of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. California already complies with this ruling, but the California Constitution still contains language that says marriage is between a man and a woman.
So what does Prop 3 propose?
Prop 3 proposes amending the California Constitution to recognize marriage as a fundamental right and to remove language that conflicts with federal rulings.
And what are the fiscal effects of this change?
Prop 3 would not change who is allowed to marry in California, so this means there would be no change in revenues or costs for state and local governments.
So what do supporters say about Prop 3?
Supporters say Proposition 3 protects every Californian's right to marry, regardless of gender or race. And they also say Prop 3 updates our state constitution to match what the federal courts have said about who can marry, reflecting current court decisions and our values as Californians. They also say Prop 3 is supported by a broad and bipartisan coalition of civic and faith leaders, as well as civil rights leaders.
And opponents? What do they say?
Opponents say Proposition 3 removes important protections for marriage while pretending to expand rights. They say a fundamental right to marry means it would remove protections against child marriages, incest, and polygamy. They also say same-sex marriage has been legal across the country since 2015, so Prop 3 is fixing a problem that doesn't exist.
And what about campaign financing for Prop 3? Can you tell us about that?
Sure. The 2.3 million has been contributed in support and no dollars have been contributed in opposition. See the top contributors on the screen there.
So can you tell us what a yes vote and a no vote mean?
Sure. A yes vote means the California Constitution would be amended to recognize marriage as a fundamental right, regardless of sex or race, and remove language stating that marriage is only between a man and a woman. And a no vote means the California Constitution would not be amended.
Thank you, Carol Joy.
My pleasure, Suki.
Hi, I'm Therese Scherer, and this is Jim Masters, and this is California Proposition 4. You'll see it on your ballot as authorizes bonds for safe drinking water, wildfire prevention, and protecting communities and natural lands from climate risks. It is a legislative statute. Jim, can you please tell us what the question Proposition 4 raises?
Sure. Proposition 4 raises the question, quote, should California borrow $10 billion in bonds to fund environmental infrastructure projects aimed at conserving natural resources, as well as responding to the causes and effects of climate change?
And what is the current situation around these issues?
Currently, the state pays for many activities aimed at conserving natural resources, as well as responding to the causes and effects of climate change. Over the last 10 years, the state of California has paid out $13 billion annually on natural resources and climate-related disasters, with about 15% of this coming from bonds. There are a few $1 billion remaining from prior climate bonds that have not been committed to specific activities.
What are some of the current areas of climate focus?
Climate focus is on increasing available water, conserving fish and forests, improving state and local parks, wildfire protection, and mitigating sea level rise, among many others.
And how are these activities funded now?
Funds come from local, state, and federal sources. The state can pay for these activities upfront or by using bonds. Local governments also pay for water, infrastructure, and local parks. And the federal government contributes funds to things like improving local drinking water systems and building energy infrastructure.
What does Prop 4 propose?
Prop 4 allows the state to sell $10 billion in bonds to protect natural resources and for climate-related activities.
Who would receive these funds?
Money would be offered as loans and grants to local governments, Native American tribes, nonprofit organizations, and businesses. Money would also be made available for state agencies to spend on state-run activities.
How would the funds be distributed?
38% of the funds would go for safe drinking water, groundwater storage, wastewater recycling, and flood control. 15% would go for forest health and wildfire prevention. 12% would go for dealing with sea level rise along coastal areas. 12% would go for land conservation and habitat restoration. 8.5% for energy infrastructure and renewable sources of energy. 7% to expand, renovate, and repair state parks. 4.5% for protecting communities from extreme heat, and 3% for farms and agriculture to improve soil health, reduce air pollution, and use less water.
Does Prop 4 have any other requirements?
Yes, it requires that 40% of the funds be used to directly benefit communities that have lower incomes or are more vulnerable to impacts of climate change. It also requires regular public reporting on how the bond money is spent.
What would the fiscal impact be?
It would increase state costs by about $400 million annually over 40 years to repay the bond. This is 0.5 to 1% of the general revenue fund per year.
What do supporters say?
Supporters say, given the threat the state faces from wildfires, water pollution, and extreme heat, the need for more spending on these issues is urgent. They say wildfire smoke caused more than 50,000 premature deaths in just one decade, and nearly 1 million Californians lack access to safe drinking water. And they say communities need to adapt to climate change and reduce our climate pollution right now. This is not a problem that can wait until it's convenient to fund in the budget.
And what are opponents saying?
Opponents say the cost of interest on this bond is too high. These projects should be funded from the regular budget without taking on debt. The funds voted on will be paid for by future generations who did not have the opportunity to vote for this measure. And they say the proposed uses should be separated out for funding initiatives and distribution.
What does campaign financing look like?
$170,000 has been raised in support. See the top contributors on your screen. And $0 have been contributed in opposition.
So in summary, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
A yes vote approves the state sale of up to $10 billion in bonds to fund various activities aimed at conserving natural resources and responding to the causes and effects of climate change. And a no vote means the state would not borrow $10 billion in bonds.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Therese.
Hi, I'm Barbara Strong, and this is Bob Pendole, and this is California State Proposition 5. You'll see it on your ballot as allows local bonds for affordable housing and public infrastructure with 55% voter approval. It is a legislative constitutional amendment. What question does Proposition 5 raise, Bob?
Well, Barbara, the question is, should the vote requirement for local governments to issue bonds for affordable housing and public infrastructure projects be lowered from 2/3 to 55%?
How do local governments currently fund affordable housing and public infrastructure projects?
They typically issue general obligation bonds to pay for housing assistance programs and public infrastructure projects such as roads, hospitals, fire stations, water treatment facilities, and libraries.
What are general obligation bonds?
General obligation bonds allow local governments to borrow money and repay it with interest over time. These bonds must be approved by voters and are paid for by increased property taxes. Proposition 13 amended the state constitution to limit property taxes to 1% of assessed value, with certain exceptions, including bonds issued by school districts for construction or repair.
How are these bonds currently approved?
Well, before cities, towns, counties, and special districts can issue bonds to pay for affordable housing or public infrastructure projects, they must be approved by a 2/3 supermajority of voters. School district bonds, which require 55%, are the only exception.
What does Proposition 5 propose?
Prop 5 would amend the California Constitution to lower the vote requirement from 2/3 to 55% to approve general obligation bonds. These bonds would fund local housing assistance programs, including affordable housing construction and a wide variety of public infrastructure projects. It would allow local governments to assess property taxes above 1% to repay these bonds, adding this exception to the Prop 13 limit.
How is affordable housing defined?
Prop 5 defines affordable housing as developments that are affordable to households earning up to 150% of a county's median household income.
Will there be oversight?
Yes, the local jurisdiction would be required to conduct an annual audit to ensure that the funds are being spent as intended. The audits would be released to the public and submitted to the California State Auditor.
What would the fiscal impact be?
A lower voter approval requirement would likely result in more local general obligation bonds passing. This would increase the funding available for housing assistance and public infrastructure. The amount of increase would depend on decisions by local governments and the voters, and the cost would be paid for with higher property taxes.
What do supporters say about Proposition 5?
Supporters say California has a deficit of 2.5 million homes. Prop 5 can make California more affordable and ease this severe housing crisis. They say this is a public safety issue. Public safety specific bond measures have been supported by more than 55% of the voters, but they failed because they did not attain the 2/3 approval. They also say lowering the vote threshold to 55% creates parity with school districts and cities, counties, and special districts. School districts won voter approval for lower thresholds 2 decades ago.
And what do opponents say?
Opponents say Prop 5 undermines Proposition 13's check on local government's taxing authority and erodes property tax safeguards. They say Prop 5 opens the door for massive new tax hikes for property owners and increased rents for residential and commercial tenants. And they say the proposition language on public infrastructure is so vague that virtually anything can qualify.
Can you tell us about campaign financing, please?
Sure. 2.5 million has been contributed in support and 28.5 million has been donated in opposition. You can see the top contributors on your screen.
In closing, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
A yes vote means that the vote threshold to pass local bond measures for housing assistance and public infrastructure would be lowered to 55%. And a no vote means that the vote threshold would remain at 2/3.
Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome, Barbara.
Hi, I'm Lauren Breland Long,
And I'm Caroline Silverstein.
and this is California State Proposition 6. You'll see it on your ballot as eliminates constitutional provision allowing involuntary servitude for incarcerated persons. It is a legislative constitutional amendment. So, Caroline, can you tell us what question Proposition 6 poses?
Sure. Prop 6 poses the question, should California amend the state constitution to prohibit involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime and to no longer authorize the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to discipline any incarcerated person for refusing a work assignment?
And what is Prop 6's background?
California's Constitution mirrors the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which bans slavery and involuntary servitude except for as punishment for a convicted crime.
What's the current state of involuntary servitude in California prisons?
In California, the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is currently able to require able-bodied incarcerated people to work. Time credits can be earned for good conduct and for educational or rehabilitative program completion. Those that refuse work assignments can be punished with the loss of privileges.
How many people in California are incarcerated in prisons?
As of May 2024, the population of incarcerated individuals in California is approximately 92,000 people.
Do all incarcerated people in California have work assignments?
No, about 1/3 of incarcerated people in California work at assignments. Some support
running the prison facilities, including food service, groundwork, building maintenance, and office administration, and some support the community, like firefighting.
And do they get paid?
California's minimum wage is $16 per hour, and state law permits the Corrections Department to pay up to half of that minimum wage, or $8 per hour. The current average hourly wage is 74 cents per hour.
What does Proposition 6 propose?
Proposition 6 would end the practice imposing mandatory work requirements for incarcerated persons in jails and prisons. Instead, jobs would be voluntary. It would also protect the incarcerated from being disciplined for refusing a work assignment.
Would time credits still be offered?
Yes, time credits would continue to be offered to reduce sentences in exchange for incarcerated persons voluntarily accepting work assignments.
What are the fiscal effects?
State and local criminal justice costs depend on how the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation incentivizes the voluntary work assignments. Costs would increase if wages are increased. Costs would decrease if time credits are increased because people would serve less time. Either way, costs likely would not exceed tens of millions of dollars annually. This amount is less than 0.5% of the state's total general fund budget.
What do supporters say?
Supporters say involuntary servitude is an extension of slavery. Slavery is inconsistent with our values and should be stricken from the California Constitution. They say California is one of just 16 states that still allows involuntary servitude for incarcerated people. They also say Proposition 6 ends slavery in California and upholds human rights and dignity for the incarcerated. Rather than normalizing exploitation, we can prioritize rehabilitation and prepare people in custody to successfully return to their communities.
And opponents, what do they say?
Opponents say if Proposition 6 passes, it could cost the taxpayers more if wages for inmates are set higher. By allowing incarcerated people to refuse work assignments, the management of prisons could become more difficult. And they say this is a reparations effort. The state should instead be focused on the budget deficit.
Would you please tell us about campaign financing?
Sure, $93,000 have been contributed in support of the proposition as of September 3rd, 2024. And as of yet, no contributions have been recorded in opposition. See the top contributors on your screen.
So in conclusion, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
A yes vote supports amending the state constitution to prohibit slavery and involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime, and incarcerated people cannot be disciplined for refusing a work assignment. A no vote opposes amending the state constitution to prohibit slavery and involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thanks so much, Lauren.
Hi, I'm Karen Weeks,
Hi, I'm Sarah Thorpe.
and this is California State Proposition 32. You'll see it on your ballot as raises minimum wage. It is an initiative statute. So Sarah, what does Proposition 32 pose to California voters?
Prop 32 poses the question, should California raise the state minimum wage for all employers to $18 per hour by 2026 and thereafter adjust the rate annually based on inflation?
What's the current situation, Sarah?
Since January 2024, the California state minimum wage is $16 per hour for all businesses except fast food restaurants, which is $20 per hour. State law can set higher minimum wages for employers in some industries. For instance, healthcare has specific laws regarding minimum wage increases depending on the size of the employer, the type of facility, etc.
What does Prop 32 propose?
In 2025, this proposition would increase the minimum wage from $16 per hour to $18 per hour for employers with 26 or more employees. Employers with 25 or fewer employees would have to pay a minimum wage of $17 per hour. Then, in 2026, the minimum wage would be $18 per hour for all employees.
And will there be any further adjustments?
Yes, starting in 2027, minimum wage will be adjusted annually based on inflation. The state's adjustments would mirror the US inflation rate, but will never be less than 0 or more than 3.5% per year.
And what would the fiscal impact be of these changes?
That would depend. Higher minimum wages tend to push up wages for other workers. Businesses paying higher wages would likely pass increases along to customers, and higher wages could reduce some business profits. On the other hand, with increased incomes, there could be fewer people enrolled in programs like Medi-Cal, which could lower state and local government costs. The change of revenue could reduce the state's general fund, but likely that change would be less than 0.5% to 1%, 0.5 of 1%.
And what do supporters say about Prop 32?
Supporters say every Californian who works a full 40-hour week should be able to afford life's basic needs. People need to be able to afford rent and feed their families. They say increased income boosts the economies of local communities and creates more jobs in the communities. And taxpayers should not subsidize corporations that choose to pay low wages, enabling those corporations to keep profits for their owners.
And now what do opponents say?
Opponents say Prop 32 forces small businesses to increase prices, adding to inflation and raising the cost of living in California even more. They say Prop 32 costs jobs with the greatest impact on teens and people of color in entry-level jobs. And they say the market, not politicians and bureaucrats, ought to dictate the financial growth and success of working men and women in California.
What does the campaign financing look like for this proposition?
$11.5 million has been contributed in support of Prop 32, and $55,000 has been contributed in opposition. You can see the top contributors on the screen.
So in summary, what does a yes vote mean and a no vote mean?
A yes vote approves increasing the state minimum wage to $18 per hour by 2026. Thereafter, the rate adjusts annually based on inflation. A no vote means the state minimum wage remains at $16 per hour.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
You're welcome, Karen.
Hi, I'm Mary Topliff,
And I'm Regina Bianucci-Russ.
and this is California State Proposition 33. You'll see it on your ballot as expands local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property. It is an initiative statute. Hi, Regina. What question does Prop 33 pose?
Prop 33 asks the question, should the state law that limits rent control for certain types of property be repealed? And should the state limit the initial rent for first-time tenants in all types of housing?
What's the current law behind Prop 33? And what's the situation?
Rental housing is expensive in California because there's not enough housing for everyone who wants to live here. About 1/4 of Californians live in communities with local rent control. In 1995, the state passed the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. This act limited local rent control laws from applying to single-family homes, condominiums, and housing occupied after February 1st, 1995. Rent control currently only limits rent increases on existing tenants, thereby allowing landlords to reset the rent for a new tenant.
What does Prop 33 propose?
Prop 33 would repeal the 1995 Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, which prohibits laws imposing rent control on certain housing. Repealing this act would allow local rent control laws to apply to any housing.
Are there any other impacts of Prop 33?
Yes, the proposition would allow cities and counties to limit the initial rental rates that landlords may charge new tenants in all types of housing.
So are existing rental control laws changed?
No, the proposition itself does not make any changes to existing local rent control laws. Generally, cities and counties would have to take separate actions to change their local laws. The state would be prohibited from taking future laws to limit local rent control.
What would the fiscal impact be?
The fiscal effects would depend on how many properties end up being covered by local rent control and how much rents are limited. These things would be decided by future actions of local governments and voters. If local rent control laws expand, local governments could have increased costs to carry out these laws. These costs could range from a few $1 million to tens of millions of dollars annually. These costs likely would be paid for by fees on landlords.
And what are some of the situations that would impact these fiscal effects?
Well, some renters could move less often. Some renters who live in properties covered by rent control could spend less on rent in the future. Some renters who live in properties not covered by rent control could spend more on rent. Landlords could sell their properties to new owners who would live there instead of renting it out, resulting in fewer homes available to rent. And property tax revenues for cities, counties, special districts, and schools could decline because landlords might not want to pay as much for these properties, devaluing rental housing, thus reducing the amount of property taxes paid by landlords.
So what do the supporters say?
Supporters say that the affordable housing crisis is destroying the California dream. Nearly 1 million people have left California in the last 5 years. This crisis will only get worse as young, talented people leave and the needy remain. They say that even if you're not a renter, your quality of life and the value of your property are still harmed by the housing crisis. And every city should decide for themselves whether or not they need rent control and which types of property that rent control would apply to.
So what do the opponents say?
Opponents say that rent control is complicated and leads to unintended consequences. The Legislative Analyst's Office, a nonpartisan government agency, says this initiative could lower the property values on homes. They say that Prop 33 is a Trojan horse that overturns state housing laws, as well as has no protections for renters. This ballot language was challenged by the Yes for Prop 33 campaign, but was affirmed in court. They also say that capping rents for more properties, including ones built after 1995, is essentially a signal to developers to build less, not more, housing units that the state critically needs.
Can you tell us about campaign financing, please?
Sure. As of August 21st, 17 million has been contributed in support and 40 million has been contributed against Prop 33. You can see the top contributors on your screen.
And let's close with what a yes vote and what a no vote would mean.
A yes vote means that state law would not limit the kinds of rent control laws cities and counties could have. And a no vote means that state law would continue to limit the kinds of rent control laws cities and counties could have.
Thank you, Regina.
You're welcome, Mary.
Hi, I'm Megan Stone, and this is Donna Roper, and this is California State Proposition 34. You'll see it on your ballot as restricts spending of prescription drug revenues by certain healthcare providers. It's an initiative statute. Donna, can you please tell us the question Prop 34 puts to the voters?
Sure, Megan. Prop 34 poses the question, should certain healthcare providers be required to spend 98% of revenues generated from the federal discount prescription drug programs on direct patient care?
And what's the background on this prop? Can you give us the current situation?
Medi-Cal is a federal state program that provides health coverage and pays for prescription drug costs for low-income people. The federal drug discount program provides discounts on drugs to healthcare providers like a Kaiser Permanente who meets certain rules.
And who receives federal drug discounts?
Eligible providers are public or private nonprofits that focus on serving low-income people, and state law prohibits providers from charging Medi-Cal more than the discounted price of the drug.
Is there any oversight on these discounts?
There's currently no requirement or oversight on how revenues earned from the federal discount prescription drug programs are spent.
What does Prop 34 propose?
Prop 34 creates new rules about how certain healthcare entities spend revenue from a federal drug discount program. Specifically, the entities would have to spend at least 98% of their net revenues earned in California on healthcare services provided directly to patients or direct patient care.
Would this requirement apply to all healthcare entities?
No, healthcare entities must meet the following criteria. The entity participates in a federal drug discount program. The entity has or has ever had a license in California to operate as a health plan, pharmacy, or clinic, or has had certain contracts with Medi-Cal or Medicare. The entity has a 10-year period where it spent more than $100 million on purposes other than direct patient care discount programs. And the entity owns and operates or has previously owned and operated multifamily housing units with at least 500 violations with a severity level of high.
Is there any oversight in Prop 34?
Prop 34 requires affected entities to report their revenue and expenses annually to the state. The state can charge affected entities fees to cover any enforcement and penalty costs and operating restrictions.
What would be the fiscal impact of Prop 34?
Prop 34 would increase state costs, likely in the millions of dollars annually, to enforce new rules on certain healthcare entities. Affected entities would pay fees to cover these costs.
What are supporters saying?
Supporters say this is a simple case of accountability. When the federal government gives discounts to healthcare providers, taxpayers deserve to know that the money is being used to help the neediest patients. They also say this proposition would provide much needed transparency and rein in abuse.
And what are opponents saying?
Opponents say that Prop 34 is an attempt by the California Apartment Association to harm a specific healthcare provider, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, that supports rent control. They also say that Prop 34 weaponizes the initiative process, so no organization in the future will be safe from retribution.
What about campaign financing?
So far, $18.5 million has been contributed in support, and $532,000 has been contributed in opposition. See the top donors on your screen.
All right, wrapping up. What does a yes vote and a no vote mean on Prop 34?
A yes vote means that certain healthcare providers would be required to spend 98% of revenues generated from federal discount prescription drug programs on direct patient care. And a no vote means these new requirements would not go into effect.
Great. Thank you so much, Donna.
You're welcome, Megan.
Hi, I'm Carol Joy Harris, and this is Diane Rogers. This is California State Proposition 35. It's an initiative statute. You'll see it on your ballot as provides permanent funding for Medi-Cal healthcare services. Diane, can you tell us what question Proposition 35 poses?
Sure. Prop 35 asks voters, should California make permanent the existing tax on managed care organization health plans and require this tax to be used only to fund Medi-Cal healthcare services?
Thank you. And what is the current situation behind Prop 35?
The managed care organization tax is a per month, per person tax imposed on managed care insurance companies like Kaiser Permanente that the state created and authorizes to pay for Medi-Cal healthcare services. Medi-Cal is the state and federal healthcare insurance program for low-income families, seniors, and people with disabilities in California.
Is the managed care organization tax new?
No, the managed care organization tax has been in place since 2009. It's approved every few years by the legislature and federal government. It was last approved in 2023 and will expire at the end of 2026.
And how is the revenue collected by this fund handled?
Currently, this tax revenue is put into the general fund, and lawmakers use it to pay for existing costs in the Medi-Cal program and increase funding for Medi-Cal and other health programs. For instance, the state uses this money to increase Medi-Cal payments to doctors. It is estimated to raise between $7 billion and $8 billion annually.
So what does Prop 35 propose?
Proposition 35 proposes to permanently establish the per month, per person tax on managed care organizations starting in 2027, subject to federal approval. In 2025 and 2026, Prop 35 will impose new rules regarding which Medi-Cal services receive funding from the tax.
Are there rules regarding how the tax revenue collected can be used?
Yes, it requires the state to use tax revenues solely for specified Medi-Cal services. Plus, it prohibits revenues from being used to replace other existing Medi-Cal funding and caps administrative expenses. It requires independent audits of programs receiving funding.
So what would the fiscal effect be of Prop 35?
In the next few years, there will be no changes to state tax revenue. In 2025 and 2026, there would be increased state costs between $1 billion and $2 billion. In 2027 and thereafter, Prop 35's permanent tax on health plans will create new rules about how the money is spent. After the temporary tax ends, the long-term fiscal impact is uncertain due to various rules in the California Constitution that impact the state budget.
And what do supporters say about Prop 35?
Supporters say Prop 35 will improve access to healthcare, reduce emergency wait times, make prescription drugs more affordable, and expand our healthcare workforce. They say this initiative represents the most important investment in California's healthcare in our state's history and will increase access to care well into the future.
And what do the opponents say?
Opponents say restricting how the tax revenue is spent hamstrings future legislators and the governor's ability to balance the state budget. No official opposition group has filed to date.
What is Prop 35's campaign financing?
$33.6 million has been contributed in support. See the top contributors on your screen. And no dollars have been contributed in opposition to date.
So in summary, what does a yes vote mean and a no vote mean?
A yes vote supports permanently authorizing a tax on managed care organizations requiring revenues to be used for increased Medi-Cal programs. A no vote opposes extending the tax on managed care organizations, allowing it to expire in 2026.
Okay, well, thank you, Diane.
You're welcome, Carol Joy.
Hi, I'm Caroline Silverstein.
And I'm Becky Bingay.
And this is California State Proposition 36. You'll see it on your ballot as allows felony charges and increases sentences for certain drug and theft crimes. It is an initiative statute. Becky, what question does Prop 36 ask of the voters?
The voters are asked, should there be changes to felony laws and an increase in sentencing for certain drug and theft charges?
What is the current situation?
Currently, people convicted of a felony can be sentenced to county jail or state prison, depending on the crime and their criminal history. People convicted of a misdemeanor can be sentenced to county community supervision, county jail, and are given a fine. In 2014, a law was passed reducing some theft and drug crimes from felonies to misdemeanors.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, shoplifting items worth less than $950 and drug possession became misdemeanors. If these are nonviolent crimes, the people convicted of these crimes serve time in county jail or receive probation rather than serving time in prison.
So what does Prop 36 propose?
Proposition 36 would change punishments for some drug and theft crimes in 3 ways. First, it would change some misdemeanors to felonies and increase those sentences. For example, theft of items worth $950 or less would become a felony if the person has 2 or more related past convictions. Enhanced penalties could be imposed if an offender steals, damages, or destroys property by acting together with 2 or more other offenders or by causing losses of $50,000 or more. The value of the property stolen in multiple thefts could be aggravated so that a felony can be charged.
What other changes are proposed?
Second, sentencing for fentanyl, cocaine, heroin, or methamphetamine possession could be lengthened and would earn felony sentences to be served in state prison and not in county jail. People convicted of possession of these drugs with 2 or more past convictions for related drug crimes could be charged with a treatment-mandated felony.
What is a treatment-mandated felony?
Offenders would receive mental health or drug treatment and be offered shelter, job training, and other services. If treatment is successfully completed, the charges would be expunged and there would be no jail time. If refused or failed, the offender would get up to 3 years in state prison.
You mentioned Prop 36 would change things 3 ways.
Yes, third, it would require warnings to convicted hard drug dealers and manufacturers that they could be charged with murder if they continue to traffic in hard drugs and someone dies as a result.
What would be the fiscal impact?
Increased criminal justice system costs could potentially be in the low hundreds of millions of dollars annually, primarily due to an increase in state prison population. Increased local criminal justice costs potentially in the tens of millions of dollars annually due to court-related county jail, community supervision, and court-mandated health and drug-related workload.
What are the supporters saying?
Supporters are saying this bill would reduce much-needed accountability for repeat offenders. And there's a need to discard the pieces of the 2014 law that are making it harder for public safety officials to keep our communities safe.
And what are opponents saying?
So opponents say this ballot measure would cost billions of dollars by increasing the prison population during the time when California is already dealing with budget deficits. And this is a huge step backward that will do nothing to make our communities safer, line the pockets of for-profit prison corporations, and take funds away from successful rehabilitation and recidivism programs.
Can you tell us about campaign financing?
Sure, $9.9 million has been contributed in support, and $1.3 million has been contributed in opposition. See the top contributors on your screen.
In conclusion, what does a yes vote and a no vote mean?
A yes vote would approve changing certain drug and theft charges to felony laws and increasing sentencing. A no vote would oppose changing certain drug and theft charges to felony laws and increase sentencing.
Thank you, Becky.
You're welcome, Caroline.